British American tobacco is down 28% year to date. Welcome to the Fiscal Philosophy YouTube channel. I happen to own shares of British American tobacco. Just because I have it doesn't mean it's right for you. What the heck happened? Well, they're down 28% year to date, and just in the last day, they've fallen by over 8%. This comes on the back of them impairing their U.S. tobacco cigarette brands by a whopping $31 billion. This is coming up as basically a write-off on their balance sheet. And we're going to get into that a little bit more later, and we'll also take a look at the financials. Is it possible that BTI is in the value zone still today? Is this an opportunity, or does this spell trouble for the future of BTI? Let's take a look. The first question on my mind is, well, it's down so much. Is BTI a declining or dying business? Well, on the one hand, yes, a lot of countries have seen significant declines in smoking traditional combustible tobacco products. But BTI is, of course, diversifying into a lot of other products that are in the nicotine space, we'll call it. And I think that their revenue inching upwards tells us that they're doing a pretty good job of adjusting to these trends. Free cash flow is one of my favorite measures for tobacco companies specifically, simply because it usually closely mirrors what they put out as their adjusted earnings per share. Now, free cash flow is also not impacted by something like this giant $31 billion impairment that they announced. It sort of reminds me of the, the $18 billion impairment that Altria had to do not too long ago with their Juul investment. These impairments aren't cash expenses. The cash was already spent on that acquisition quite a while ago, and so the impairment doesn't really affect cash going forward. And BTI has what I think are some of the most beautiful gross margins I've seen for any business that isn't a software company. Heck, this is as good or better than some software companies. Now, I think it's important to note that their free cash flow margin is pretty similar to Altria Group, which is another major tobacco company. And the difference is BTI appears to have a higher gross margin, whereas Altria looks like they have a higher operating margin. So that means BTI has lower cost of goods, but more operating costs. So they end up with a pretty similar amount of free cash flow for each dollar of revenue that they produce. But still, with these gross margins, it's certainly hard to go under. With regards to the dividend metrics, well, BTI has a yield of nearly 10% with a payout ratio of 57%. That's based on net income, not free cash flow, but suffice it to say, the dividend is pretty well covered by free cash flow as well. In fact, this is one of the lowest payout ratios in the tobacco space. Altria's, usually they target about 80%, so this is a pretty healthy and sustainable dividend from my point of view. As far as dividend growth, whether it's positive or negative, since most of the financials are listed in Great British Pounds and there's a currency conversion situation that happens with ADRs, this may just be due to fluctuations in exchange rates between pounds and dollars, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to slight fluctuations in the dividend growth. Unfortunately, I do have to call out the balance sheet as a major point of weakness for British American. So this shareholders' equity is mostly propped up by goodwill on the balance sheet, and that's about to be impaired by about $31.5 billion, while at the same time they have around $37 billion in long-term debt, which they have expressed as a priority to get paid down to a more reasonable level, which I think is smart considering the interest rate environment that we're in currently. The data feed I was looking at only provided one 12-month price forecast from analysts, which was $38. But they did offer a little bit more insight into what the next couple years might look like from a revenue and earnings perspective. As many as 16 analysts are going out to 2025, and they're looking at low to mid single digit increases in both revenue and EPS, not counting on the 26 and 27 estimates, since that's really just a couple analysts, and the lower numbers seem more in line with what BTI has proven capable of. Let's talk about the write-off for a second. So they're charging off $31.5 billion in value off of their US-facing business. They blamed macroeconomic conditions in the US, as well as the proliferation of what they're calling illicit modern disposables. That's basically vapes from small knockoff companies that aren't being regulated effectively by the FDA and are ignoring a lot of the product testing and regulatory requirements that are binding the bigger companies like British American Tobacco. Now, when it comes to valuing BTI, I put in to this DCF calculator the assumptions that would get you to roughly my cost basis on the company. So, as you can see, we've deducted tangible book value, okay? And by the way, that is not going to be affected by the impairment, since that big swath of deduction will come off of the goodwill. So goodwill is not counted towards tangible book value, so that actually won't really change this valuation really in any real way. We assumed 5% free cash flow growth, dropping to 3% after some time, and an 11% discount rate. The high level of consistency of nicotine companies makes me pretty happy with, an 11% discount rate. But I may have mentioned earlier that the one analyst price forecast was $38. And guess what happens when you put in the default standard 10% discount rate? That's right. You get roughly $38. So, yeah. If you put in 11%, you get roughly my cost basis. And if you put in 12 or 12.5%, like I often like to do for a lot of other companies, you get something much closer to today's valuation. So what does that mean? I think it means the market today is saying, hey, we need a little bit of a heftier discount rate because the news in the US isn't good. I didn't see it really mentioned in the article at all about the impairment, but there is also the increasing regulatory crackdown in the US in general, and a lot of individual states on certain tobacco products, increasing the smoking age in a lot of cases from 18 to 21, I know has happened in some areas, and cracking down on menthols, flavors, etc. Basically just trying to make it as restrictive as possible. Meanwhile, these bootleg little vape companies keep popping up all over the place, selling things that are, again, not subject to the same level of, product and safety testing, etc., and regulatory eyeballs the way the big companies are. And of course, if these little knockoffs come out and they're cheaper, and they offer maybe flavors or options that are just not allowed to be put out by these big companies because, they would face fines, etc. Well, of course, that's going to eat into the bottom line some. Now, I think overall, that's not doomsday for the big boys, but it certainly makes me understand a little bit about why they would impair their US-facing business by a certain amount. So, with that being said, I'm happy to continue holding my BTI at these prices. I'm not necessarily looking to add a bunch more. I think I got it for an okay price. And I think over the next few years, I will probably be pretty much okay on this. I think it's certainly not in any remote danger of going to zero anytime soon. And I do think I'll get a reasonably good return. And if I'm wrong to a certain extent, maybe my return will only end up being like 8 or 9% instead of 11 or 12%. And, you know, granted, that's not a grand slam, but I can live with it for sure. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. If you have any BTI or any other tobacco or nicotine companies in your portfolio, love to hear about it. If you found the video helpful, I encourage you to put that key down now in order to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell. And make sure you leave your comments down below with what you think about British American tobacco. And join us on Discord. Link is in the description. Consider becoming a channel member. Link is also in the description.